Hello. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of On the Record, but also not just another edition of On the Record. This is going to be our first video of the new year, 2025. We're back, and for the first time ever, we're in the same room.
In the same room. There's no wall here between us.
No green screen. Look,
Yeah.
watch this. Fucking beautiful.
Yeah. No tricks.
No CGI.
No tricks, no CGI. Not this year. Maybe later. No green screen. No, none of that. We're back here to talk about a great album, a wonderful album. But first, I would like to introduce the man that's going to introduce the music. And I'm going to throw it to On the Record legend, titan, giant, Mr. Tanner.
Field correspondent Tanner.
Thank you. Yes,
Yes.
I'm fully fueled by some poutine that was eaten earlier.
Let's go.
I'm ready to talk tunes. And we were talking about what's an album that we should do. Faye, for the first episode where you two are in the same room, but also for an On the Record with all three of us. Thing like a seminal 90s album, a band with New England ties.
Mm-hmm.
And we came to the agreement that we should cover Billy Breathes by Fish.
What
Now, this album is... Wait, no! Listen, please! And the album that we're going to talk about is none other than Get a Grip by Aerosmith.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. We're going back into 1993 for an album that some people rang in their new year with, because if I looked at it correctly, this came out January 1st, 1993, correct?
You
Sounds
could
good
be
to
right. Yeah, sounds good to me.
Okay, great,
Yeah,
perfect.
I knew 93. That was the part about this I knew.
That's all you needed to know. And
Yes.
kind of like went at this in a weird order because, I mean, Jeff's right here.
Mm-hmm.
He's home. He's in Vermont.
Yes.
Once again, Maine, Texas, eliminated from the equation.
Mm-hmm.
We're back. We're in the same room. It's Jeff. Jeff, how you doing?
Yes. I'm doing fantastic. So this is one I was excited about. We had talked about it in our group chat. It just came up that I think you found it. I started ripping that album, and I was like, you know what? Of all the albums to talk about, of all the good ideas we've ever had on this podcast, what better way to start out when we get, for the first time, all three of us in the same room and talk about an album that I know back to front, that I have listened to for the better part of 20 years now. An absolutely fantastic piece of work by Aerosmith called Get a Grip. I first got this album because I had the Big Ones CD, which was Aerosmith's, their kind of greatest hits, compilation. I think there was a couple original songs on that one. Bands used to do that sort of thing all the time. And I was on the bus going from daycare to school, and this kid saw I had Big Ones, and he says, "Hey, do you like Aerosmith? I got something else for you." Ooh. So I was like, "Well, what do you got?" And he hands me this cassette with this cover on it, and I probably 5th grade, 6th grade or so when I got that cassette, and seeing that as the first thing, I was like, what are we getting ourselves into here? Because it was Aerosmith and Meatloaf, Bat Outta Hell 2 at that point was my kind of deepest familiarity with rock and roll music, and certainly classic rock. From the get-go on this album, I was absolutely hooked, and have been from 10 years old to now nearing 40.
Almost. He's almost there.
Almost, folks.
Yeah.
Stay tuned. Is he going to do it?
What are your origins with Get a Grip?
My origins with Get a Grip are my origins with Aerosmith, because this album is the one that has, like, ask someone if they don't want to miss a thing, what are they going to name? I think from the older stuff, you might get Sweet Emotion. You probably get Sweet Emotion. Dream On. But I think a lot of people are going to hit you with the songs off of this album. And again, it kind of came up during our childhood. And, listening to it in our 30s, this is a greasy album. This album is pretty greasy.
Yes.
This is an album. It's hard like not to like drink while you're listening
Yes.
to it. It's one of those
Yes.
ones. It's like sort of like Dropkick Murphys Warriors Code. It's like
Yes.
you're sitting down listening to this. No, you should be like punching someone in the face and drinking at the same time. Definitely a party album. When I was a kid, my aunt and uncle were moving, and they had like a big moving sale. They had all their CDs in their basement, ready for the moving sale, and they said, "Hey, go through if you want anything. You know, grab it before we start the sale tomorrow." And I got a fair amount of decent CDs in there, not really knowing what they were, knowing the names of the artists, but not knowing the albums. I got like Stormfront by Billy Joel. I knew Billy Joel. I had Piano Man. Okay. Midnight Oil.
Australians.
I know.
Yes. What's up, Down Under?
And this one, Aerosmith, Get a Grip. I didn't know any of like the songs off it when I was like super, young. But I just knew it was an Aerosmith album. I said, okay, I'm going to take this. And then the CD had a picture of each of the guys in the band's nipple on the on the CD. So that was interesting to open up. But the music on it is just it's just simply it's tremendous, and I'd say it's also like timeless.
Yes. So everybody, I think the first thing they think of is either Live It on the Edge or the kind of trilogy, the, Crying, Crazy, and Amazing. I think those are, excellent songs, but the ones that I love on this, the one that really hooked me was Eat the Rich.
Mm-hmm.
You go from the intro where it's Steven Tyler doing his rap thing, the wake up kids, half-assed new thing, never really changed about the date, and then you go into Eat the Rich and that riff to start Eat the Rich, that
They do
just
the hits.
just in the way that Steven Tyler just has that really raspy, high-pitched, like powerful voice. You hear a lot of these guys that do that kind of gravel in their voice and stuff, and sometimes they lose some power. He was able to get to places with his voice where it was so distinctly Steven Tyler, and it starts right out with first that kind of intro, but then the first true like song or single on the album with Eat the Rich, and you hear the way he says yeah at the beginning when it really kicks into the riff and the kind of beat drops in, and then the lyrics are really good on this song. Imagine me at 10 years old when you hear you can take that Grey Poupon, my friend, and shove it up your ass, and that's like how how this album is going to go, and that's pretty much how it goes.
Whoa.
Yeah, just kind of mind-blowing, right? And same thing with like Meatloaf, Bad Outta Hell 2 with What About Your Future? It's defective. You can shove it up your ass. Yeah.
There's a lot of ass shoving happening between 90,
92,
Yeah.
93.
And it's funny that those were, these were the two
Yeah.
Get a Grip and, Big Ones and Bad Outta Hell were like the albums that heavy rotation for me until I got a little older and kind of started expanding on things a little bit. But there are so many, whatever version of Aerosmith you love, whether it's the hard rock and like Back in the Saddle Again type of Aerosmith, or you prefer the Sweet Emotion or the Jaded or the Don't Want to Miss a Thing type of ballad Aerosmith, like there's both versions on this, and I think at their best of both versions of themselves on this album.
It's an interesting like kind of, it bridges the gap for me between the kind of bluesier stuff that they were doing up to this point, like through the 70s and like kind of up into the 80s. Obviously when Walk This Way was kind of reinvented with Run DMC, it's where you kind of notice Steven Tyler being like, rap, you say? And he kind of gets into his little bit of rhythm, which I will say, tends to hammer quite a bit in quite a few songs, that specific pattern. Mm-hmm. Steven Tyler's going and he's gonna da-da-da-da, which is fine.
The Blondie rap.
The Blondie rap. But just like the way that like that started to infiltrate, and some of the, like when he decides, as like an example, I watched some interviews with him, when he gives people examples of like riffing in the blues style, the stuff he just pulls out is just, it's like really cool what he does. And he adopted that style based on Joe Perry's guitar playing. Mm-hmm. Because he heard that and he was like, if you listen to the way my voice sounds in Dream On, I'm kind of doing a Pee Wee Herman type thing, or John C. Reilly maybe. You like hear that difference to the point where I've heard people be like, that's like the old singer. And it's like,
Same guy.
I hate to tell you
Same-
this, but no,
same
you're wrong.
Yeah, for better or worse, same
Yeah,
guy.
And that's where they started. His dad was a musician, and he used to practice all this stuff out of the music books. And then finally, he was playing with Perry, and he was like, all right, well, this is the sound his guitar is making. I kind of want to do this with my voice. And he just snapped into it and figured it out. And he's been able to find like a bunch of different cool things to just like approaching it from the angle of a vocalist. Just kind of hearing the way that like he stayed current with the times for like just long enough each time. He cranked into ballad mode when Armageddon came, late 90s, early 2000s. And it's just always been these like subtle reinventions. And I think that's one thing overall for Aerosmith. This album in particular, Get a Grip, I think represents like a great pivot point for them. They took advantage of the internet in a really crucial way. Tom Hamilton was like extremely online for like the early internet, and Geffen really didn't know what to do with the World Wide Web. Like the internet was like a defense thing, and very few people had it for a long time. So it's like, how are we going to do any kind of marketing here? And Aerosmith had a leftover song, and they said, we waive our royalty rights and put it out for free on the internet, these download sites, and see what happens. So I think there's a lot of cutting edge that goes into this, and it's an interesting pivot from the 80s into the 90s, moving forward for Aerosmith up to now, which is definitively the end because they done touring.
Yeah, and to be honest, talking about kind of the end of the group, once they kind of hit the stuff with Joey Kramer, all the kind of the drama and the legal
Yes.
stuff, you could kind of see that the cracks were forming and that they probably weren't going to be around for much longer. And then they had to cancel a bunch of dates, and then they postponed a bunch of dates, which was going to be their farewell tour. And they just said we can't even do it because they were going to tour with the reformed Black Crowes.
Yep.
In pretty much name only, just the two brothers, none of the original guys.
called
Yeah.
Two
Well, if you
brothers.
ask them, they were the Black Crows anyway.
The cash grab crows.
Yeah.
Play the old stuff.
But and like in the 80s, like specifically, like Aerosmith kind of got into that, like, as a lot of bands did, like Heart famously, but like that kind of corporate rock. And for a while, my mom's boyfriend Pete has loved Aerosmith. They're like his favorite band. He's loved them since the beginning. He's from Boston, and like he tells me that his favorite era of Aerosmith is the 70s. The album like Draw the Line. That's his. So there's like that hard rock stuff, and then it hits the 80s, and it kind of alienates their tight fan base, but they get way bigger. And then this is like in the 2000s, I think after Just Push Play, they did an album called Hunkin' on Bobo where they did like really bluesy.
Yeah.
And this is like the perfect kind of mix of like, there is still like corporate rock elements to it because it is like a very finely polished album.
Very much so.
But it's not like schlock. Like it's not just like,
No.
oh, we have an obligation to do 13 tracks or however many, like you can tell like there's roots in this style of music for them, and they're getting back to it 20 something years later.
Yep. I think these were less, I mean, there's certainly pop songs on this, but a song like Fever, a song like Flesh, certainly. I mean, there are some kind of like bordering on good taste, with some of these songs.
Shut Up and Dance.
Shut Up and Dance. Yeah, I mean,
like,
there's some of these
poppy
songs,
and
especially
it's-
with the lyrics, like Flesh has straight up, you're kind of hearing like simulated sex scenes in there. You know what I mean? Like they really go that far.
They've never been a subtle group, Aerosmith.
And it's not as if Led Zeppelin didn't do stuff like that. Squeeze my lemon till the juice runs down my leg. So it's not like they were the first ones to do this sort of thing. But I think they. A song like Flesh is very clever and funny, when it starts like, I got a margarita nose and a breath full of Mad Dog Blues. I mean, just like paints a picture for you, and talking about in Eat the Rich when they're dancing in the opera with Muff and Uncle Biff, and it's just like this album, I think, almost better than any other Aerosmith, like paints a picture for you. Like I feel like there's some decent, I don't know about like storytelling in that you're kind of going through anything linear, but it's painting a good picture and setting a really good scene in each of these songs for you.
Definitely visual lyricism.
Yeah.
Like it's like not necessarily like story. It's not like, oh, this guy's name is this and this is what he experiences.
Yeah.
Right.
But there's like visual stuff, and sometimes it's little phrases, and sometimes it's long phrases, and sometimes it's like the whole song you can kind of like visualize.
Yeah.
Here, in Flesh, and it's like when he does Flesh, you got me all soaking wet. You're just like, ugh,
Yeah.
you know, you know, it
Oh,
just
I
makes
smell
you-
it.
Yeah, it makes you feel like stick. Like I need a shower after listening to that.
And also the bass part on that song specifically is absolutely fantastic
Yes.
when he sings the flesh and he does the bass slide. And,
Yeah.
everyone really shines on this album. Yeah, it's just like a very cohesive effort. And it, you know, I know you're not the biggest Love in an Elevator guy. I like that song.
That's a great song.
Yeah, but like again, like they like the consistency. I think track to track, they kind of lost their way a little bit, and it probably had to do with the amount of drugs they were taking. I would have to
yes.
guess.
In and out of rehab.
Yeah.
Everybody in different configurations.
Yeah. Because I think this was, I mean, this like '93, obviously grunge era, you know, killed off a lot of these bands. Like Aerosmith were one of the ones that survived. You know, bands like Guns N' Roses, you know, and that you might consider like their contemporaries, like they kind of, if they even made it to grunge kind of put them away. Aerosmith was one of the few of that type of band that really survived that whole thing and really thrived, because this album I think debuted at #1. I don't know, Alex, were you saying it was the first one they
I
had?
think it was their first one.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Don't Want to
this-
Miss a Thing was their first single. Obviously not off this album, but their first single to go #1.
And I mean, this was their 11th studio album, so I mean, they had a lot of bites at the apple before this, and this was the one that pushed them over the top when supposedly this type of music at this time shouldn't have been popular.
Yeah.
Yeah, you either go grunge or die trying at that point. Like,
Yeah.
you had people trying for grunge and totally whiffing, or they couldn't try and they couldn't compete. It's the same thing, like, what killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age. What killed Christopher Cross? MTV. What killed all the hair metal and glam metal bands coming out of the 80s? Grunge killed it dead. And I think one of the things, like, this is a great example of something Aerosmith did decade after decade, which is not to run into that buzzsaw, which was reinvention without trying to be like a desperate attempt at relevance. But you didn't try to be grunge. You didn't run away from trying to compete with grunge. At the same time, staying true to yourself, kind of moving the pieces forward. So again, it's this like great pivot point for the band. It was a great pivot point for rock music going into the 90s, being like, you don't have to do grunge. Grunge turned out to burn out pretty quick. Gave us a lot of like beautiful stars that burn brightly and burn right up fast. Lane Staley, Kurt Cobain. So it had its time, and if you could survive it, then you could bring this kind of stuff straight through the 90s. And this influenced a lot of the shit that we were listening to when we were younger.
And you talk about like how, like, you know, hair metal grunge comes in, hair metal dies, and the beauty of like a band like Aerosmith is they were never like a hair metal band or a glam band.
Right.
They were like a bluesy rock and roll outfit that just has kind of adapted to the times a little bit. You know, they just kind of go with the flow. And again, the collaboration with Run DMC, another really good example of them kind of being ahead of the curve on stuff and meeting rap in the middle and making a cosmic shit ton of money while doing it.
Oh man,
Yeah.
I can't even imagine.
And also, like, it goes to say, like, I'm sure they had contracts and they, you know, had obligations to like come out with more albums and everything, but like, you do a collaboration like that in the 80s and you're everywhere. You're all over MTV. You're absolutely everywhere. It's kind of like, what is left to do? You know, really, like, what, you know, they obviously like, hey, we're a band, we still want to make music, but like, what, you know, what are you still chasing? What are you trying to end? And always, you know, kind of changing the playing field that you're on. Again, this is like so. It's like blues. Like, you listen to it, especially like being young, you listen to it, you don't even realize that it's blues. You're just like, oh, this is Aerosmith, and then you're like, oh, Aerosmith is like a blues band.
Yeah.
Like in like the same vein, like without horns, but like the same vein of like a Blues Brothers, like like those blues bands from the 70s, and they're the last. Well, they were the last one really standing until they called quits.
Yeah.
And they still email me all the time. I bought one item from them, and they're like, "You need more.
You need more.
50th anniversary
gotta-
merch."
You only bought a shirt. You got legs
Yeah,
and a
you-
head, don't you?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
got pants.
Fucker.
Yeah, you're short. They really, I think, you know, also pushing, you know, because you have your kind of ripper songs like "Eat the Rich" and "Flesh" and
Fever.
You know, and you have these songs like "Shut Up and Dance" and, you know, "Line Up" is maybe not a ripper song, but definitely very bluesy. You know, you have those songs that are like kind of your classic style Aerosmith, but then you have like the trilogy, and you have "Crying," you have "Crazy," you have "Amazing." It's to me, those are the ones that really separated them from what the rest of music was doing at that time. I mean, you had, like, we were talking about Tommy Shaw and Jack Blades being on this album.
Mhm.
They were in the Damn Yankees, which is, if you know, Can You Take Me High Enough or whatever, is that the name of that
Yep,
song?
yep.
Like, just, I remember the commercial for the compilation CD that had, like, you know,
Yes.
and it just showed Ted Nugent, like, playing guitar with it standing up. But that was like
Blocking
that.
bullets with
Yeah,
it.
it was like that type of music. And so I think you didn't have, I think Guns N' Roses, their issue was they weren't a grunge band, but they had a grunge look and they had a grunge feel to them. So there wasn't a lot of space adjacent to grunge for Guns N' Roses to occupy. Aerosmith stayed in their lane and went even a little further, you know, because they didn't do a ton of ballads that I mean, previous albums, you might have a better judge of this, but I don't remember a lot of songs before that trilogy that's really sounded like that trilogy from them.
They had songs that were kind of like slow burns or like kind of builds in them, but like nothing along the lines of I would say like their ballady stuff would align more with a song like Living on the Edge versus the trilogy of tunes toward the end of the album. And also, you know, we talked about MTV and everything. The music video with Liv Tyler and Alicia Silverstone, you know, put this thing right over the top too. Like they, you know, the merits of having your daughter dance like that in a music video, we're not here to discuss.
You know.
But it was a huge song, and they took advantage of again the music video.
And she got to be Arwen because of that.
Yeah.
And Alicia Silverstone got to be Batgirl. Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, one of them turned out better for sure.
Yeah, one of them got the better end of that deal.
And then one of them went in Armageddon as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think a little bit overlooked, but I think that was more relevant to like her being in the music video for this. Now, I think her being in Armageddon, she was already kind of established as an actress and everything there. To me, it felt a little bit like he was kind of pimping out his daughter, putting her in these videos, because it just felt strange.
I said we're not here to argue the merits. It's not a great look for Steven Tyler.
Not a great look,
Yeah,
and
it's
certainly
not
something accusations he's dealt with in the past and recently, of the way he would act in certain situations. I think those music videos, just take the music for what it is, folks. I think you're not going to like digging into that very much.
And the music, for what it is, in the case of the trilogy of Crying and Crazy and Amazing, I prefer to say you have Crying and Crazy and Amazing, because Crying and Crazy are pretty much the same song.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying anything no one said before.
Yeah.
But let's if there's a bunch of elephants in the room, y'all, let's not just spend all our time on the one. This one wants peanuts too. Feed him.
I do think we need to point out the kind of different type of songs, like Gotta Love It. I think a song like Line Up is not necessarily as similar to the others. It's not a straight blues ripper. It's definitely a blues song. But I think it's just Aerosmith also like to get a little weird. I think is you don't see that necessarily with like Sweet Emotion or Dream On back in the day. I think they had a sense of humor. They like to do things that were a little bit different. I think that's why they were so willing to do just a straight up schmaltzy, cheesy ballad like all of the trilogy songs.
Yep.
And then have a song, and then they have a song Boogeyman at the end as an instrumental. Like that does not seem like it fits at all with the album, but they were just like, we like that. Just throw it on the end there.
Yeah. This will take us up over an hour, too. This album's over an hour long because everybody's trying to fill them CDs at that point, too. Again, you go with the changing of the technology and the changing of the delivery system. The 35 to 45-minute album, people are really like kind of stretching that in this era, too. So
that's why it is a doubler. There are 2 records in that sleeve.
Yep.
Because it's so long, time-wise.
Yep. And I think back then, obviously, there's much more. I think we've now gotten back to there being a focus on creating an album rather than a compilation of singles, which a lot of bands have consistently just done albums. I'm not saying that that's totally was out of the question, but with this, I think there was such an effort to provide like a product that people were really going to latch onto. And I think Aerosmith, this album in particular, is probably, other than Walk This Way when they joined up with Run DMC, I think this album in particular is the most savvy release that they've done, because it came at a time when it shouldn't have succeeded, because this type of music was not succeeding, and it went number one. You know, and you could say, and Aerosmith had been popular for a long time, but their most recent like super popularity was Walk This Way, and that was quite a bit before this happened.
And when was Pump? 87?
Somewhere around there.
It was late 80s.
Yeah.
For sure.
Let me ask you guys this. Would you say, irrespective of whether the fact the band was in dire straits or going along just fine, considering the timing, considering where they were as a band and where music was at this point in culture, would you call this a do or die album? Like, if this had failed, what do you think this does to the trajectory of Aerosmith? So is this do or die?
So this, I was reading, was the last album they did with Geffen before they moved to Columbia again. So does that move to Columbia happen if this one falls flat and then they don't have a contract anymore with Geffen? But then maybe they make their own label. I mean, they probably all had plenty of money at that point to back it up and take care of the publishing and everything. But you know, it's a great question.
Do you you get to this crossroads, and again, if this album doesn't hit as it does, do you just kind of become a nostalgia act and just go around and just play the hits for the next 15 years, you know? Or do you keep writing songs? Because again...
And does Armageddon happen?
Exactly.
Does Don't Want to Miss a Thing happen if this one doesn't hit?
You've got that in the mix, Just Push Play. That was really... that album sold a lot in the 2000s as well.
Somehow. We don't need to go again. We don't need to go into the merits
What,
of
you
that
don't
either.
like pink?
Not my favorite color.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's my new obsession. But yeah, and again, like the landscape of music was such at a place where it's your last album on a contract, and this style of music, you know, your hair metal, your whatever, isn't really in anymore, and you have to kind of like when a pro athlete signs a 1-year contract because they want to try to bet on themselves and then play really well, and then sign a multi-year deal the next season.
Right.
It's a similar kind of thing of like, we got a lot of bullets in this gun.
Mm-hmm.
This is our last. This is the Prove It album, in many ways. The deal's ending. We're not really in the zeitgeist anymore. And again, to come out with an album that we're still talking about to this point, and several songs that still get a ton of airplay on your classic rock radio.
Oh yeah,
classic hits radio stations, things like that. It's funny because like a lot of my favorite and a lot of stuff we've really spent time talking about are the ones that like don't get a ton of radio airplay on classic rock radio, which is a damn shame. People should be ashamed of themselves because some of these tunes are absolute rippers and they should be playing on the friggin' radio.
Yes.
For every Eagles song that you play on classic rock, you remove it from the rotation and you insert a different song off of this album.
Couldn't agree more.
Yes.
Couldn't agree more.
I think Shut Up and Dance needs to get in there.
Shut Up and Dance, Flesh, Eat the Rich. And it's interesting we mentioned the Eagles because you had seen you looked up that Don Henley
was on Amazing.
So they called in the hit from
Called
Mr.
in the
Henley.
strike.
Yeah.
Lenny Kravitz was on lineup. I mean, they brought in their buds.
Yeah.
They brought in their buddies on this one.
And when the collaboration flows like that, like you can just tell that this must have been a shit ton of fun to write and record.
Yes.
Like this isn't the kind of music that I would particularly think they were like stressing about in the studio when they were recording it.
Yeah.
It
And was this
probably
right
an
around the
absolute
time
riot.
of Wayne's World 2 as well?
It must have been. It's 93,
with Wayne,
right?
with Wayne Stock?
What year did Wayne's World 1 come out? 91?
I think so.
Wow, okay, so
Yeah.
then we're...
I think it was right. So this was kind of another like Renaissance era for Aerosmith, who had when Sweet Emotion came out and Dream On came out, like those were huge hits back then. And then in the 80s, they had Back in the Saddle. They had, well, I guess maybe that was 70s too, but then they had the Walk This Way with Run DMC, another kind of renaissance for them. And then in the 90s, Get a Grip. They're in Wayne's World 2, like that. I'm pretty sure that movie did crazy numbers at the box office because the first one was so good. And they were like a prominent feature in that movie. Like it wasn't just a passing by like Alice Cooper was in the first one, where it's just like he gets his little 5 minutes on screen. Like the whole movie kind of revolved around Aerosmith being there at Waynestock.
Right.
And then they show up and they're just like cool as you expect them to be in the movie. And you just realize like these guys were just born for that, or at least Steven Tyler and Joe Perry were.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
I don't know if the rest of the guys cared to be. I think there's just a feeling with Aerosmith that other bands just couldn't achieve. And as much as I might get crucified for making this comparison, but like Led Zeppelin, is looked at as like a seminal rock and roll band that a lot of these bands like kind of derive from. And obviously Aerosmith probably was influenced by Led Zeppelin like quite a bit. Every band that played blues likely was. Just like Led Zeppelin was probably influenced by the Rolling Stones. I think it, kind of goes on and on and on. But I think Aerosmith at this point deserves to be put up there with bands like Led Zeppelin, with bands like the Rolling Stones. They've been doing it for so long, so successfully. There's only a couple songs, a couple eras where you're like, that wasn't so great. But it really wasn't so bad that you're like, that you thought it was. It's not like we were talking about with Mr. Roboto with Styx and how much of a shock that must have been if you were like following Styx up to that point and then you hear that song, you're like, what the hell is going on?
No.
Yeah, so with Aerosmith, I think they've rewarded their fan base over the years because whether it hit or missed, I think the effort was there. I think they cared about putting out a good product, and I think they were way more I think Steven Tyler gets a lot of attention for kind of his antics and how he acts and like the mouth that looks like he could swallow a planet. Joe Perry's just like super cool Joe, and I think the other guys were very much background, but if you dig into the bona fides of the guys behind those two like frontmen of the band, I think you find where the real strength of the band is and why you can allow Steven Tyler to do the crazy harmonica solos, excellent harmonica player, by the way.
Yep.
Do the vocal riffs, like those kind of the scatting and stuff like that. And then Joe Perry can do those kind of really sparse, like similar to Keith Richards, where he can do those really sparse, like kind of lead lines and rhythm lines and really kind of dance around within what the rhythm section is doing. And I think the balance that they strike, not a lot of bands do that as consistently as they did over the years.
It's weirdly generous work from the guitar and honestly from vocals too, because I tend to agree. I think you can say the other guys are kind of what's like holding all that DNA together.
They're the Mirepoix.
No.
Yeah.
Oh. But there's true, I do believe like parody in it, in the sense that like, yeah, in the interviews it's going to be all about the Toxic Twins and what outrageous thing has Steven Tyler said or done this time. Like that can suck up a lot of the air, but in the product itself, you're getting everybody contributing and everybody's kind of getting a moment to build the whole thing up. And I think it speaks to the character of the album because they stayed true to themselves. They did their thing. They weren't like a bunch of 40-year-old guys trying to be 20-year-old grunge performers and trying to write grunge and stuff like that. They looked at where they were and who they are, and they're like, we've honed our thing. Why are we going to abandon it now? We have new ideas based on the things we're influenced by, the things we're hearing right now. It's obviously like what you consume is going to infiltrate your output, but we're not going to totally give up our thing wholesale to hard pivot into something that I don't think they would have been good at. I don't think they could have fit that square peg in that round hole. So I think that the smartest move that it plays is they stay true to themselves, and it's fun. Like if you try to sit there and cross your arms and have a bad time listening to this album, it's not going to work. It's fun. You hear the work ethic and the fun that went into making it come through, and it's infectious. It's impossible not to have a smile or to like get down to one of the songs. Like it's just, I think, a testament to knowing who you are and not being afraid to grow up and letting change take its course in an organic way instead of being like a desperate attempt at relevance.
This is an album of like the fun tunes where it's like summer music.
Yeah.
Nice outside music.
Yep.
Beers outside music. Cigarettes inside music. That's the kind of like time that like this album it provides. And you made a couple of points. You mentioned Led Zeppelin. I don't know if you know the story about Steven Tyler taking his then girlfriend to see Zeppelin play. I believe at the venue that became the House of Blues in Boston. And Jimmy Page took Steven Tyler's girl backstage. And that's when Steven Tyler was like, I want to be a rocker. Fuck this. And then also there's...
It's a hard lesson.
Yeah.
It's a hard lesson. Yeah.
Then also talking about, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, the dynamic of Steven Tyler and Joe Perry is very much that, but it's like... And you might get crucified for what you said. I might do the same. They're like Keith Richards, Mick Jagger 2.0. Because Steven Tyler has all of the showman qualities that Mick Jagger has.
Yep.
And he can play the hell of the harmonica, and he's got a crazy set of pipes.
Yeah.
Mick Jagger never really had the pipes. And then also, to compare them to the Rolling Stones, is that the Rolling Stones became the nostalgia act that I mentioned when Aerosmith was at this crossroads. They put this out, it goes number 1. Rolling Stones haven't put out a good album, I think, since before I was alive. So
I think long before.
So
Yeah, right.
So like,
Yeah.
and they keep putting them out, folks. I don't know why. I know you guys reviewed the most recent one.
Yeah,
We
awful.
sure did.
Don't bother.
Yeah, I know. Oh,
Yeah.
I listened. I wish I could. But so again, like we talk about like the nostalgia acts and like the greats of classic rock and how Aerosmith doesn't really get their credit. I saw something on social media recently that shocked me, and there's like a belief out there that like the generation that's kind of in college now, they don't really know Aerosmith.
I
Like
believe
Aerosmith is like kind of like a forgotten band. We're kind of like the last generation. Us and maybe like the generation that's like a little bit below us are the last ones that like were kids when Armageddon came out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like these big important things.
I think their awareness of bands like Aerosmith, and I see Sublime a lot, and Led Zeppelin, I
Yeah.
think their awareness of it is the shirts they buy at Target.
Yep.
That's as deep as their awareness gets of those bands. And I can understand that, because there are no really popular groups in the kind of current zeitgeist that are at all influenced by music like that.
No.
I think you have a real lack of... I think when you had bands like Aerosmith, it led people to Led Zeppelin. And it led people to similar acts like that, like Boston or
Going
bands
back,
like that.
going backwards,
and
yeah.
I think now you have the same thing, but the types of music that are really popular are leading people other places. I think you have, when it comes to country music, if you listen to, and I hate this, but if you listen to Luke Bryan, you're probably more likely to listen to like Morgan Wallen, because that's really popular right now. And I think there's not a lot of bands that are like the bluesy rock kind of bands. Like we know Blackberry Smoke and Dirty Honey. We know bands like that
Black
play
Crowes.
this, the
Yeah,
Black
Black
Crowes
Crowes.
that play that kind of music. Or at least, guess Black Crowes came out with a new album, but I wouldn't really say they're a current band.
Yeah,
Right.
that album doesn't exist.
So there
in the,
are bands that are
annals to
certainly
me.
influenced by Aerosmith, but they're not like out there and popular the way that Aerosmith was out there and popular. And I think that's the reason you don't really see that, is because you don't really have... It's like the coaching tree. You remember the
Right.
coaches above because of the ones that are currently doing something now. And if there's nobody, maybe there's a band that comes out that blows everybody away, and it starts to bring to light more of these kind of older bluesy rock type of bands. People start buying Boston albums again. And I think it's would be a lot of fun, but it doesn't surprise me. Because it's the same thing with Sublime. I think they got a pop when Lana Del Rey covered that Summertime song. An awful version of that song, by the way. I think they get a pop with that, but before that, if you saw somebody wearing a Sublime shirt, chances are they might have heard What I Got on the radio one time.
If that.
So I think because you don't have a lot of bands that sound like Aerosmith that are popular these days, that's why you're not really getting a lot of folks to kind of dig in and find how we got here.
Well, and I think the point is well met. Like, music today tends to feed laterally, not backwards and forwards generationally. I think it's like, if you like Billie Eilish, it's kind of like Spotify. Like, well, if you like Billie Eilish, and then it'll cycle you over, it'll somehow find its way to Chappell Roan, to Sabrina Carpenter, and it kind of like feeds within its own ecosystem without really traveling out of there and traveling backwards. You notice that a lot with pop and a lot with country. These guys that all are like, Chuck, fuck nudge it. Like, they all with their crazy... Isn't there one named like Wes Wetman or something like that? Who's the guy we always make fun of?
That
Cole.
sounds right.
Cold and Rainy.
Cold and Rainy, but there's another one. His name was like Ted Noodletooth or something like
I
that.
don't know. But I like his song Whiskey Truck.
Yeah. Winkly Tinkly is his name.
Yeah.
But no, I take the point, and I totally agree that I think you don't see a lot of people today influenced by Aerosmith, ergo you're not really having people going back and digging through that. It's hitting at a weird spot for this generation, and again, where music went in its evolution.
Mm-hmm. The closest thing that we've really got to a band that's been like pretty popular and kind of the backwards reflection is Greta Van Fleet. And the aping of the Zeppelin
And they overdid
sound.
it.
Yes,
Yeah, way overdid
and
it.
that's,
They were a novelty act.
And
is
maybe
what it turned into.
Yeah.
and maybe them doing that has kind of created an opportunity for another band to step in and look backwards and kind of take some lessons from bands like Aerosmith and add it to their sound. Or maybe all the labels are now afraid of things that sound like they could be, influenced by nostalgia, because Greta Van Fleet came in and that first album was great, and then they were just like, oh, we're just gonna like diet Greta Van Fleet on the second album,
Yeah.
and then the third one's caffeine free, and then by the fourth one you're like, oh, they're just like trying to be Led Zeppelin in every aspect of their life.
But they learned all the wrong lessons. You know what I mean? They tried to do like the abstract titles and concepts and stuff, and not even necessarily the music at that point. It's like, oh, the one thing that you actually did and did well, you've kind of abandoned. This is our mini review of Greta Van Fleet, our mini blanket party. But I digress.
No, and like you said, like everything just kind of feeds, laterally right now, and of like the bands that are popular right now, like what's like the most popular 2-guitar rock outfit that's like of this generation, shall we say? You know what I mean? Like,
I think,
is there one?
I think your closest thing right now is probably like Foo Fighters.
But I'd say that they're even becoming the nostalgia.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
like
really wouldn't.
Like who is like a peer of the Sabrina Carpenters and the Chapel Roans and the Billie Eilish's of like that same age group?
See,
that's
I
a two-guitar rock outfit.
I think you have to jump over to like punk music to do that. I think you have to look at bands like Hot Mulligan.
But they're not.
pop.
But in terms of like the success, like this album debuted at number one, like you said.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't think you're
exist.
gonna. I think you have to go down the list a little bit before you find a spot where you have bands that are like true kind of 4 or 5 piece, your kind of traditional setup rock bands, and it's not even bluesy rock. But I think you have to go to either like Dirty Honey. I think they sell out like Whiskey Myers. I think they sell out some shows and stuff. I think and they're not even like that's not even close to this. So it's I'm not saying it's equal, but it's I think you have to travel quite a ways to get to a band that you think is popular with an influence from Aerosmith, and I don't think at all close to the popularity Aerosmith had.
And keep in mind, you were talking about Aerosmith deserves to be discussed in this rarefied air. Aerosmith played a halftime show at the Super Bowl, for God's sakes. Like that's like super, super rarefied air in terms of like your crossover ability of like being a band, but also having enough pop where Pepsi's going to give you the stage at the halftime show. And look at their peers that have done it. The Who played it. Springsteen, obviously, with this super electric performance. You're not going to like this, but I'm going to say U2.
Prince.
Prince, the Stones.
Yep.
Right? So, Paul McCartney. Again, they had that little mini run there where they did a lot of kind of those nostalgia acts, and they were like, "No, that's it. Now do the Black Eyed Peas."
It's just based on the age groups they want to capture.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah.
Who are you missing that year? I think, not to cut you off, but you kept saying rarefied air, and I guess that's kind of based on this conversation, like my kind of final thoughts on it. Rarefied air, and maybe it's not apt to call it undiscovered country, but untapped potential for someone contemporary, because people are hungry for something they haven't heard before. And we've heard it. I don't think the upcoming and current generation have really heard all that much of it. So if you got someone who's 17, 18, 19 years old, influenced by this, and starts to try to make music like this, what's that evolution going to look like? There's a lot you can get from this that isn't kind of out in the mainstream right now. So rarefied air, fertile ground, all the elements, earth, wind, and fire.
And again, this is a band that like kind of came out of the gritty streets of Boston. You know, like
The
on
greasy
Comm Ave,
streets.
the greasy streets on Comm Ave, like where, you know, just a few buildings down from where you live when you were at BU. You know, that's where they've got the National Historic Landmark there, and like I made sure to go there. I went and saw a show at the Paradise, and made sure to walk across the street, go over, see the building, get my picture with the plaque and everything, and so maybe maybe there's like some New England-ish bias in the fact that we are like, you know, Aerosmith is so great because they're kind of from here, but there's nothing really in their music that does like a wink or a nod to Boston. Whereas
Not really.
like the band Boston named their band Boston.
Yes.
You know, like if
Talked
you,
about being in the streets of Hyannis.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. So, like, Aerosmith is from the area, but they never were, like, you know, writing songs about Boston. You know, obviously their songs about their experiences in Boston are out there, but, like, they were never, like, on the green line, going by Fenway. You know what I mean? Like, it's never any of that stuff. Which artists such as, you know, Noah Kahan, who's very popular right now, he wrote about Vermont a lot.
Dropkicks with Boston.
Dropkicks with Boston,
Yep.
right? Like, so again, they're from Boston, but they really kind of feel like they could be from any town USA. They're they're a fun band. They're a band that shows up in your town to have fun. They're a band that at one point in their careers probably was mainly trying to get chicks and get money. There aren't a lot of groups out there like that anymore. And society has changed.
I don't know if it's like at certain points of their career. I think.
Yeah.
it
Oh, yeah.
was-
No, the whole
I think,
thing.
I think it was the reason
Yeah.
for their career.
Yeah.
I think that was always the goal.
And that manifested itself in their lyrics a lot more than from where they were from.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that last kind of you know, there's attitude on this record.
Yeah.
There is attitude. They got a song called "Eat the Rich." They're all rich bastards. You listen to that song,
Yeah.
you believe it. You're like, hell yeah, eat the rich.
Yeah.
Steven Tyler's net worth is in the multiple millions by the time this record came
Going
out.
for you, Steve.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
know, and this album has an everyman quality to it as well. Until you kind of get to the big three ballads, but that's almost just like a little addendum to it, you know.
Yeah.
Like those three songs kind of exist in their own little sphere within the album.
Yeah.
That's mostly about drugs, fun, sex, money.
Yeah. See, I think the only way we see a band maybe hit in this same way is, you know, it's not going to be through traditional means because nobody gets popular from radio play or stuff like that these days. It's what songs go viral on TikTok, what goes like on YouTube, what controversial video is everybody watching. You know, there's other ways that these things go viral than they would go at this point. You know, I think they were helped out with the music videos with Alicia Silverstone because, you know, she was a babe back in the day. So people, and also there was a lot less avenues for entertainment back then as well. Like you didn't have the internet. You could just sit and scroll through TikTok or Instagram Reels, or, you know, you didn't have this sort of instant gratification. You kind of had to be like, okay, I'm going to put myself in this area, meaning I'm going to turn on the radio or I'm going to turn on MTV, and I'm just kind of beholden to what they show me. You know, so I think when that video comes out and you see Alicia Silverstone and looking great and the song is great, you know, it hooks you and it sticks with you because you don't have a million things coming at you all at once like you do these days. You know, you don't have 15 different avenues of entertainment that you're getting every single day. It was one or two. So those avenues with which to really kind of like get into your life were, you know, if you were already a popular band, were a lot easier. So I think it's going to take something that's a viral thing, like on TikTok or on Instagram or something. They put it in a movie that wins an Oscar or something, and it starts to build steam that way. I think if you get a band that creates, and I can't even imagine how good the song has to be to like create that sort of steam and momentum. But I'm thinking you have to have something like a driver's license or an espresso type of impact, you know, with the song that you come out with in order to kind of get this type of music back into that zeitgeist. Because even when this was popular, I honestly, I can't think of any bands that were doing anything like this.
You said avenues. I'll add like the term like algorithm. Like back when this came out, there was like one algorithm, and it was MTV or like MTV VH1, two algorithms.
Or your
you know
record
what I mean?
store.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And now you like personally have so many algorithms running through your phone. You know, your Instagram is an algorithm. Your Spotify. You know what I mean? Your Twitter. all of these things are now just your singular algorithm, whereas it used to be, I'm going to turn on the radio. And the algorithm is what the DJ decides to play or what the radio station, you know what I mean? Like, so again, and people don't, it's kind of on the rise again. You know, vinyl sales are up and everything. It's growing every year, but like the physical purchase of media and music specifically is so like, you know, watered down these days that you go to a record store and most of it is the used, like it's all used stuff. There's like a new section. They're always pretty expensive. Honestly, it's not really great for the record store if you go in and just buy the new stuff. You just the money for them is in the old stuff. In the old stuff.
This sounds like a cash grab.
Yeah, just a cheap plug for all record stores out there. But no, like the algorithm and everything, and you know, how can this song go viral? Aerosmith wasn't worried about that when they were writing this. They were like, how do we make a kick-ass record?
How are we gonna get laid, man?
Yeah, exactly. Not
like,
how,
let's party.
Yeah. Not how am I gonna get on the algorithm on TikTok?
Yeah.
Who's gonna be? Who's gonna crack the code? Who's gonna take all of the elements, put them together, and give us something that exists in the same sphere, that has the same flavor, the same great low-fat, milky taste, sucks straight from the tit, like Get a Grip, which I have alternately this week called Cop a Feel and Grab a Tit and all kinds of stuff.
Working titles.
Working titles? Does anyone have any like burning final thoughts before we send this home?
No, I think we've said it all pretty much from my perspective, in that this record rules. And if you've not listened to this record before and you are still watching this without having paused this and listened to it and then resumed it, what are you doing? This record is awesome. It's one that like everybody kind of has a different story of how it got to them, and it came out for our generation, 1993. Like we were pretty young when it came out, and it's still got the staying power. We're sitting here, in 2025, still talking about it and still singing its praises. And we listened to it last night when we were hanging out just around the table, and it's like it's good background music. It's good. Like when I sent you guys the picture of me listening to this, it's good. Sit in your living room with the galaxy light going and with an edible, and just turn it up. Music, you know what I mean? It can be a party for one, or it can be a party for many. Outside, tarps off, drinking beers, go inside, cigarettes inside. Get a grip.
Get a grip, folks. Great album. And if there's nothing else, this has been an absolute pleasure being in the same room finally.
Yes.
Finally.
Yeah, hopefully this is not the last time that we're able to do this. And on behalf of my wonderful co-hosts here, until next time.